How long do you think it took me to figure that one out? So now if I go to my level 3, my level 2, my level 1. Okay, so now level, grid lines, same as levels. Okay, you can turn on and off the bubble. Okay, you have your same align tool if you drag these up. Okay, because the dimensions got dimension to the grid lines, they're moving with them. Okay, if you take the align tool off, you can move this guy up or down. If you bring it back, it realigns it. If you change it to be 2D, just like our level lines, if you pull this up, the 3D point stays there. Okay, and the 2D point, and you can right click and say reset to 3D extents, and it'll reset it. Again, grabbing this guy, pulling it up or down, on or off. Okay, and you can do that with both ends. Okay, you can turn this guy on or off. You can make it 2D or 3D. Okay, remember the 2D point won't affect the opposing view. Okay, oh, I didn't want to do that quite yet. Okay, if I pick on here and I make it 2D and then I drag this guy and it is, you have to zoom in. The 3D point is there. Watch again. If I pull this up, okay, up to there, that's the 3D point. This is the 2D point. Okay, so if I was to do a section through here, let's do a section through here. Okay, pull this out. Will I see grid line A? Yes, I will. I wasn't sure if I was going to see that or not. Okay, so the section shows up even if it's only cutting the 2D grid line as opposed to the level where it has to cut the 3D point. Maybe if I pull that guy out, it'll not show up. No, still there. Okay, back to my level 1. So you do have the option. The difference being is that in here it's a floor plan. So if I grab this grid line A and pull it out on my level 1, okay, the 2D point, that's not going to affect my level 2. Okay, my level 2 is still back here at the 3D point. Let's move our 3D point back to here. Okay, so level 6. Notice where this is here because level 6 is set at the 3D. But if you go back to that level 1, okay, take this guy, turn this guy off just for, there's the 3D point. Well, on level 1, we're showing our grid line like this. For our own reason, we can do this. This will only change this floor plan, level 1. If you go to level 2, these guys are still set at the 3D point. You can do it to its own 2D. You can take this one, pull it out, do the opposite, make them 2D and pull them out. Okay, if I move this 3D point, it'll move the end point of the grid on all the floor plans that have not been set to 2D. So if I go up to level 7, see where these guys are? Okay, now if I go back to my level 2, these 2D points have been pulled out. The 3D points are still there. If I grab this 3D point and pull it out, and grab this guy and push back the 3D point, then if I go to my level 7, I've effectively moved these two guys. Now, just a sec. Yeah, there's that. So if I pull this guy out, there's the 3D point. And if I take this guy, oh, it's because they're aligned. Pull this guy back to here. Okay, and let's pull this guy back to here. That's the 3D point. Okay, so if I go to my level 5, that's where they're going to be because these have not been set to be 2D. If I change this level 5 to be 2D, I can do whatever I want with this guy. Change this guy to be 2D again. My 3D point for level 7 is still going to be back there because they're still set to be the 3D. So if I move the 3D point, it'll move the end of that grid line in all the views where the end point of the grid line is still sitting at 3D. That's why we have the tool to go in here and click on this grid line. Notice that when you change levels, it stays lit, and you can say right click and say reset to 3D extents. Click on here, right click, reset to 3D extents. Boom. Now they're all going to be, all the 3D ones I should say. Pick on here, right click, reset to 3D extents. Pick on here, right click, reset to 3D extents. Now, similarly with grid lines, let's say this guy, let's unalign it. Let's pull this guy way out to here. And let's align this, unalign there, and let's pull this guy out to here. Similarly to grid lines, or grid lines to level lines, if you pick on here and you right click and you say maximize 3D extents, it'll make itself as big as the biggest 3D grid line. Bink, out it goes. Okay, if this guy happened to be bigger for whatever reason, again, oh, it's aligned. Let's get the alignment tool off. Okay, pick on this guy, right click, maximize 3D extents. Click on here. Now what happens if we set this to be 2D and set this to be 2D? Let's take the bubble off just to make it easier. Now, so this one is set to be 2D. Let's right click and say not reset to 3D extents. Let's just say maximize 3D extents. Okay, interesting. So what that does is it actually takes the 3D points of the grid lines and maximizes them just like it would. But the only difference is this one is set to be independently controlled with 2D. So now we have to do the old reset to 3D extents. And now it's out. So that works the same way as levels. Maximize to 3D extents. It just so happens if this is 2D, we move our 3D point, okay, it'll stay. Right click, maximize 3D extents, the 3D extent moves out. So when it's 3D, it means it transcends itself vertically in this case. So that if we go to all of our levels, and if we go to level 5, and in level 5, grid line B is set to be 3D, and oh, this one's 2D. There's the 3D way down there. So when you drag this 3D point that I'm doing here, that's going to drag the end point of all the grid lines in all of these views if the end point is set to be 3D. In this floor plan level 5, it's not. So I'm going to right click and say maximize or reset to 3D extents. Boom, down it goes. Now if I click on here, okay, and I go to my level 1, okay, there it is, same point. If I go to here and I drag this and I go way down here, okay, all the floor plans that have that grid line set to be 3D are all going to be extended way down to there. In this case, I think they all are. Okay. So very similar grids and level lines. If we go to a 3D view and I go back to my architecture and say set the work plane and I pick a grid line, which you can do, okay, and then hit OK and then turn it on, see that would be kind of setting like we did with levels. That would be setting the work plane to be at that particular grid line. So as you drag the grid line in plan view out here, you have the option to drag the 3D point or the 2D point. Okay, and grid lines are visible. Level lines are only visible from plans and sections, but grid lines are visible from elevations and sections and floor plans. All of them. Okay, it's like a big vertical sheet. So the reason why we're spending so much time on this is, of course, in Revit Structure, our structural system and our beam systems and our footings and our columns and all that stuff is all very heavily tied to grid lines and level lines. We're going to see that as soon as we start to get into some of the drawing. I'm just nudging them over with my arrow key. So a couple of basic lessons on grid lines. Again, you can pick on here anytime, play with the numbers, pick in here and change this to be whatever you want. You can change it to be lowercase, uppercase, doesn't matter. Okay, they also show up as reference planes when you go in here and you set a work plane. And then the last thing that we've dabbled with the level lines and we kind of touched on here is if you pick on here and you hit the little break or squiggle button, it creates a dog leg, and then from there you can grab these guys and kind of move them around. You can grab these grips and move them here. So there's the grip, which is the end of the grid line. Okay, the 2D or 3D point. I don't need to say any more about that. It's just it's offset because of this. So if you want to bring it back, you bring it back and it heals itself. So you can take any grid line when they're really close to each other, for example. Maybe this guy's here and this guy's here. Okay, and they're intersecting, so you can pick on here. By default, it goes to the right. You can kind of pick on there and do something like that. However you want to adjust your dimensions. And then if you want to play with it, you can just play with these numbers. Okay, you can pull this up or down, and you can move this guy up or down. And this is really the end point again. You don't want to necessarily lock it. So what I call the dog leg split available in here works very much the same with grid lines as it does with level lines.